Episode of the Relevant Recruiter Show. Today, I'm honored to have someone who's been at the forefront of building elite teams in some of the most critical sectors for over 15 years. My guest, Benjamin Mena, is crafted data science and cybersecurity teams for global top secret national security programs. So we're going to talk about his journey and his business Select Source Solutions. But if you've been following along, you know that Benjamin gives a ton back to our industry. And one of the ways he does that, one of the ways he captures attention of his own audience is through his Elite Recruiter podcast. And so we're going to talk podcasting big time today. So Benjamin, thank you so much for joining me on the show.
Oh man, excited to be here. And Donnie, I just want to say thank you back to you for the things that you've been doing over the last few years for the community, because the game has absolutely changed.
Yep.
Like it is changing so fast. And I've seen you helping with some of your products, some of your training, really helping take recruiters to the next level and making them actually be relevant.
Man, I appreciate that. That's awesome for you to say right away. Give us a little bit of background, Ben. I mean, how did you get into the recruiting industry? How did you get into the space? Like, what was the journey?
So, like all recruiters, I think we kind of fell into the space. I actually wanted to become a Navy economic intel analyst focusing on the Chinese government.
Okay.
I know, very focused, very direct. The Navy recruiters are like, we want you to be a pilot. And I was just like, I don't want anything to do with flying planes. If I wanted to fly a plane, I would tell you. And like, they spent months like, you should be a pilot. I'm like, I want to do intel work. So fast forward, had a friend that worked at the Pentagon, sat down with me and kind of told me like what it's really like. And he was like, it sucks. Like, you are a people person. You need to go find a people career. So started talking to different people, actually found a mentor that worked as a recruiting director at a large government contractor. And she's just like, hey, you need to go work at an agency, get the skill set, learn how to become a great recruiter at an agency, and then go internal. And that's what I did. So worked at Aerotech for a few years, had a blast there. If you've heard my podcast, about 2 months in, they actually wanted to get rid of me. They wanted to fire me. They said I sucked and I was the worst recruiter in the entire office.
Wow.
But luckily was able to turn that around, and I was, top of the charts there, went internal for many years until, me and my wife kind of looked at each other in France after getting a layoff, and it was like, let's go do this on our own. So it's that's how the story went.
Yep. So how did that? So you're focused on kind of cybersecurity, data science, but you're really specifically kind of in the GovCon space. And we were talking about this a little bit before, right? About the possible shutdown and what the impacts are. But how did you end up in that industry? Was that just because of your initial interest of that?
So I think it's like let me kind of phrase this question first. I think a lot of recruiters kind of like end up in an industry that they know nothing about.
Right.
And you got to kind of sometimes shift your career. And this took time for me to do, to an industry that you're passionate about, because the passion comes through. So I started off as a construction management headhunter. And then in the evenings at Aerotech, I started filling recs in other offices. And of course, my account manager hated it, but I was trying to build my book of recruiting business focused on government contracting. So I'd be there, 8 to 6 for him. And then from, 6 to 8 o'clock, I was filling other recs because I had a passion for the industry. And because I had a passion for the industry, I just started building that book of business for myself. And, from there, like I said, it kind of went internal, but you got to find an industry that you're passionate about. And it's so cool when you're sitting there watching the news, kind of knowing some of the things that are out there that you've helped put those teams together.
Yeah. Well, you probably get some really cool experiences with that. But I think you said something that I really want to drive home, which is, I think, super important, because people reach out to me all the time about, well, what should I pick for a niche, or I'm thinking about pivoting or whatever. And, I think the thing that's so key is like picking something that you're passionate about, right? Is because in my experience with helping people is like, this isn't all universally true, but it's almost equally as hard to get traction in almost any industry, right? So you might as well go play in a place that you're going to enjoy. And especially if you're going to be more of an independent recruiter, you're really setting yourself up with a glorified job that you're going to do every day, right? It's not a business where every people are working for you. So if you're going to do that, you might as well be doing something you're fired up about every single day. That's usually like the number one piece of advice is like, if there's viable market there, then passion should be the next choice.
And it's the grass always seems greener on the other side. Like, oh man, that niche looks amazing. Like one of the things that we're about ready to deal with is a government shutdown and the huge impact that it has on the GovCon community. So we're like, oh, because of that, like this is another shutdown. Let's look at it like, but it's you know, when you have a passion for something, it comes off with your clients. It comes off with like the work that you're doing and the customers that you're dealing with. And, they call you back and, we always joke around, like we always come back kicking and screaming, but we love putting together some of these teams.
Yep. Yep. Now, obviously, you mentioned that this industry has changed a lot, over the years. It seems like it's changing yearly right now. I mean, how have you seen the recruiting industry change over the years, and how have you personally adapted to some of that?
So one of the biggest change, I mean, like I remember like back in the days when like the yes, OG job boards were brand new. Like I feel like I've been in this space for a while. Like LinkedIn, like when LinkedIn, I was like, I think it was like 1 or 2 million people were on LinkedIn when I first started getting like and playing LinkedIn. Like,
Right.
LinkedIn was a recruiting tool. It was mostly a connection tool back then. It was kind of like, it became this place for like, everything. And now like you're seeing a combination of like, all these different Chrome extensions that are able to find just about anybody. You're dealing with like internal recruiter. Like I hate to say this, internal recruiters used to suck.
Mm-hmm.
But now internal recruiters are like highly skilled at doing many of the things that like staffing agency recruiters are great at because of all the tools and you're able to access anybody. But one of the things right now is like, because everybody can access everybody, there's so much noise, and you now have to, I think in 2024, start looking for ways that you can easily break through the noise, create an authentic voice, and become a consultant for the organizations that you're dealing with. Because, I think the game is going to continue to evolve, especially with the implementation of artificial intelligence.
Yep, I totally agree, and I think that consultative approach is so important, right? If not, you're kind of going to be. I mean, the work might still be there, but you're going to be very transactional. Probably not a valued recruiter at that point. Somebody that's going to be competing and working on multiple jobs. So, yeah, I think the consultative approach and being the authority is the way forward. At least if you value your time and money. So,
and I know that's one of the reasons why we're here to talk is like a podcast, but there's ways out there, because here's the problem. Like there's some recruiters that are out there that are just amazing on the phone. I envy them. I suck. I'm not the fastest talker. I'm not the smoothest talker, but what I've been able to do is come in and create I'm an industry expert. Here's the thing. Like I actually put out LinkedIn articles about the space. Like I conversations constantly, and the podcast creates an authentic voice that I'm able to just literally like point at other things, and they're like, oh yeah, you know your shit.
Yep, exactly. Well, you can either say you know your shit, or you can show them that you know your shit, and that's what the content, the marketing, the videos, the articles, all of that does is it just proves that you have solutions to their problems. So, love to hear that. Now, earlier before we get into the podcast, I'm not going to let you get away with this one. You mentioned that you're partnered with your wife. What's that like working with a spouse?
I think it's fantabulous, and it probably is for the right person. But she actually, prior to like us working together, she actually built up a data science recruiting and training company, and she was actually in charge of scaling it. She helped grow it, and then they sold it off, and nobody had equity there. And she was just like, that's the last time I'm building up somebody else's dreams. So she's like, hey, let's actually, if you want to get a laugh, she called me up on the way home. She's like, I actually just quit, and we were building our dream together. So
there you go. That's how it's usually.
And I absolutely love that we're on the same page. People see me a lot more than they see her. She likes doing a lot of the stuff behind the scenes. And, we've kind of structured it where I'm the face, sometimes the talking head. I'm the one, like, even though there's a lot of stuff that she's doing, like half the time, like everything that's going through my inbox is stuff that she's doing.
Right. Got it. Well, that's awesome. That's awesome that you guys were able to, find the partnership, and I love the inspiration of, it usually comes from some event like that in life where you're like, all right, screw this, we're not doing this anymore. We're doing this our way. Yeah. That's really cool.
And it's I definitely recommend it. It's one of the things at the end of the day that we know that if we don't get the work done, guess what? We're not eating. But I mean, we like, in saying that we've structured things, like even if the government shut down for a while, we'd be like, all right, cool, let's go have some fun.
Yep. Awesome. For those of you that are with us live right now, if you can go in and tap that like button or some sort of reaction, if you're enjoying this interview here with Ben, we're going to transition now into talking about podcasting and let Ben be the expert there. Also, feel free to go in and ask any questions as we get into this topic if you are curious. So, Ben, let's just talk about like when did you start your podcasting journey? Like when did this all start?
So I feel like podcasts started at two different times. 2020, the beginning of the pandemic. And in 2023, I think because of technology, everybody can start a podcast. And I've been telling everybody to start a podcast, and now everybody is. But started off really just, the world shut down, and wanted conversations with some friends, like highlight some of the stuff that's happening, the great stuff happening when the world was literally on fire.
Yep.
So that's really how the podcast started, was back in 2020. And I was kind of like just here and there kind of thing. And then it started picking up speed. And I hate to say this, it almost became like a little bit of a life of its own. And we're now 100 episodes in. I think I looked out last night, like 92,000 downloads.
Wow.
So, it's kind of cool. Like, I know it's one of those things like on Instagram, you see like 1,000 views, but it's like half the time it's views of people just sliding through things. But like, sometimes having months where it's like 10,000 downloads, it's like 10,000 people actually like listening to the amazing content of the guests that are there. And right. I know we're going to talk about starting a podcast, but like the cool thing is like you're like having a podcast, you're shining the light on somebody else. And because of that, the light's shining on you.
Yep. That's excellent point that you bring up there. I mean, when you're looking at that for yourself, like you brought up like kind of the challenges and what you see the recruiting industry changing. So was that like a big driving force for you to deciding to put this into your strategy? Was like, yeah, I need to find ways to separate and differentiate, or was it more of like a passion project?
It was absolutely a passion project, but I started learning at the power of that passion project.
Yep.
So I actually started a industry podcast, and when we were looking at shifting away from GovCon into Web3 before Web3 kind of blew up, the whole crypto world just kind of fell apart.
Right.
And that's a whole nother story. But by the 5th episode of that podcast in that space, I had hiring managers reaching out to me for help with recruiting. And I was using that as a secret backdoor.
Yep. That's that was going to be my next question is what type of results have you seen, or how's the podcast actually impacted? So you right away, you've seen clients and candidates reaching out to you as a result of you.
So, and here's the thing, like you can actually make a industry focused podcast where it's an absolute backdoor into every single business conversation that you ever want to have. Cause like, think about this, Donnie, how many sales messages do you get on a weekly basis?
Oh yeah. We're all getting tens to hundreds.
How many do you respond to?
0. Yeah.
What if I sent you a message and I'm trying to sell something in the recruiting space, and I'm like, hey, Donnie, I love what you're doing here, and here. I'd love to share that on a podcast in your industry. Would you be down for an interview?
Yep. Oh yeah, dude, it's the most frictionless thing in the entire world. Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's such an asset for business development. And I mean, I've helped people build a couple podcasts outside of Mona, and that's exactly what we use it for. And in fact, to just kind of share how powerful this is my buddy John Randolph, we did this with, before he even launched the actual podcast, he had already gotten 2 clients from it before it even went live.
See?
Reaching out to interview people for it. So yeah, for you guys listening, this is a it's not even a silver bullet, it's a golden one.
It's a secret backdoor. So like, and think about this. So one, you now have a relationship with that hiring manager, with that leader, with that company.
Yep.
There's so many tech tools. One podcast can easily turn into anywhere from 10 to 30 days of content if you wanted to.
Yep.
So you're like, I know one of the things out there, like create content, be the authority in the space. Like you can literally just like take one podcast, like use artificial intelligence to rip it apart. And now you have some amazing content that's now evergreen too.
Yep. No, it's all right in my wheelhouse, man. So I'm loving what you're saying. I mean, my podcast actually came from different, where I actually was doing lives on Facebook. And so the thinking for me was like, well, hey, I'm already, same thing you're talking about, it's just different order. I was like, well, I'm already creating the podcast. I just don't have it formally a podcast. I'm already doing the interview. I'm already interviewing people. Like, why don't I just turn it? And that's how I'm like, all right, well, we'll just do a podcast now. Yeah.
And there's a lot of people that are doing those industry live interviews, and like it's one of the things I think that like having a podcast creates like this little separation of authority,
Right.
because people don't realize how easy it is to really start a podcast. And yes, most people don't make it past like the fifth episode, but
Right.
if you're doing like an industry podcast and you're already doing these interviews, like you can probably have a successful podcast in like 2 hours of work per week.
Oh yeah, easily. I mean, for me, you're basically, we interacted a couple of times, right? To set this up, and then we're going to record this, and then this goes off to my assistant at this point, after the recording. So yeah, if once you get the system built out, which let's transition into that, because I think we've sold people on the value of the podcast, just with your success in some of mine alone. But for those people that aren't familiar, like, can you walk us through some of the basic steps of starting a podcast from scratch?
So the most basic step is one, actually wanting to do it.
Yep.
Because like when you're interviewing somebody, like it comes across, is it something like I feel like I need to do or something that I want to do?
Right. Is it a chore or not?
Yeah.
Yep.
Secondly, like you get the interview, and like I started off in Zoom. I know Donnie, you started off the lives in Zoom. You're now using Restream, which is like an upgraded system that has some interaction. I use a podcasting platform called Riverside. So like just pick something. There's so many great options out there. This isn't like when I started the podcast back in 2022, where things were extremely hard and you had to figure it out or hire a pro or learn how to use Adobe, which I still can't figure out how to use Adobe for the life of me. So you record it, and with all the recording places, you do the interview, you have a great time, make sure you have some sort of structure to the conversation. You give the structure to the guests, so that way they're like not, how many times have you been like interviewed and it's just like, which way are we going to go?
Right.
So you want to kind of prepare your guests. And these are leaders in your space. So like have it like thought out, like, here's kind of a direction where we're going to go. Here's some actionable questions that we're going to do. And one of my favorites is some of those actionable questions for other leaders in the space and other like peers in the space. I always love to talk about recruiting.
Right.
Like, what are some of your recruiting problems, and like having them talk about the challenges, because I mean, guess what? You're a recruiter at the end of the day.
Yep.
But it's the challenges that they're also having. So from there, like all the platforms let you pull the audio off it.
Mm-hmm.
And, pull the audio. You can actually, if you want a good laugh, if you listen to the Elite Recruiter podcast, that little intro jingle, I got that for $15 on Fiverr. The outro, it was like, both the outro and the intro was $15.
Love it.
And I've used it since. My podcast art that you see, the little running man, I typed in podcast art in Canva, and that was like a third option. And I just like added Elite Recruiter on there. Like, the thing is, like, people overthink, think it's so much harder. So, and then, what you can easily do is like, I use a program called Descript for editing. So what you do is you drop the podcast, the audio in there. Actually, you can drop video in there too. You can edit video. It's crazy.
Removes all the ums and
yeah. And like so here's the biggest thing. Like a lot of the podcast editing software was so complex, I couldn't figure it out. But like Descript, it transcribes it like a Word document, and you edit it like a Word document for your video or audio or both. And then from there, you add your intro, outro. You can use a hosting platform. I use podcast.co, which I actually picked up on AppSumo. So that was a lifetime deal. But if you go to Spotify for recruiters, they walk you through how to like upload everything to Spotify, and then walk you through how to add it to like Amazon and Apple and all the other platforms. So every time you just go to Spotify, upload your podcast, add your show notes, and hit go. Yep. And that's really, at the end of the day, like now you have your MVP, minimum viable product of a podcast.
Yep. You made that too easy, man. You made that too easy. I think you brought up something that, right away though, that I think is super important, which is the commitment. Right. And I think that's, if you do podcasts, and you show up, once a week, and then you miss 2 weeks, and then once a week, and then you miss, you're going to have a hard time getting the traction. Right. What do you recommend? I know the commitment is the recommendation, but have you found something, or what do you recommend? Is it weekly, monthly, bi-weekly, couple times a week, or just stick what you have?
I think like it all depends on like what your desk looks like, what your schedule looks like, how many deals that you're working with. I think it can be powerful to have one episode a month. Yep. I think it'd be powerful to have one episode every 2 weeks. I think for if the podcast is just going to be your secret weapon when it comes to BD, I think once every 2 weeks is definitely safe and definitely doable. Once you start getting to like once a week, it does turn into a lot more work, and it might be worth like outsourcing some of that stuff.
Yep. Well, that's what I was going to ask you is, are you outsourcing any of this stuff now?
So, like some here, some there. Like I find a good person, and then I hate to say this. One of my favorite things is like taking a 45-minute episode and going back and actually going through it again and just like re-listening to it as part of the editing process. So like I kind of look at this as my like happy hour time is now my podcasting time.
Got it. Yeah. I mean, just to kind of throw a different flavor, I mean, mine is all done with my assistant. So after I record here, which is kind of like we talked about beforehand, like this is more of a video cast that turns into a podcast. But once I'm done with it, then it goes into my assistant's hands, and then she will go through, do the editing. I use Libsyn is kind of my podcast hosting thing. And then, yeah, she posts it in there, puts the description in there, and then it posts and published to every.
And here's the cool thing also, like when it comes to like also creating content, there are now platforms like Cast Magic where you literally upload your podcast to there, and it like creates content for reels, creates content for this, creates content for a newsletter. You can interact it with your podcast like you're interacting with ChatGPT.
Yeah.
And then if you've like when it comes to like video clips, go to a website called opus.pro.
Okay.
It is absolutely amazing. Like you can literally like either upload your video podcast or like upload the YouTube link. It uses artificial intelligence and ChatGPT to analyze your podcast. It creates social media clips and gauges their score and how social they would be, and then transcribes it for you. So you could literally just be like, upload a 30-minute interview. It'll grab like 20 highlights. I'd say about 5 of those are going to be good, but now you have stuff to share on social media. And here's the powerful thing about sharing on social media. You're not I never expect my guests. I don't have the expectation of them sharing. I try to highlight them in when I share, because the thing is, like when you tag your guests, your CEO or your leader of the person that you're working with in the industry, every single person in their sphere of influence is going to see them as a guest on your podcast.
Yep. It's pure power.
And you shining the light on somebody else, like it shine back on you.
Exactly. So what do you use to measure the success of your podcast? Like, are you looking at downloads? Are you looking at, because you talked about it, it's your backdoor into business development, right? But I also know that this is a passion thing for you too. So like, what are you measuring? What's good look like for you?
Good looks like I just got an email from somebody that is making a career switch into recruiting because so many people have been a guest on the podcast that they just ran across, and they're so passionate about the industry that this person is looking at making a entire life decision based on guests talking about the podcast. So like, I see that as like, what I like. I see that as success. I know what the world is probably looking like. Do I need to like XYZ amount of money? Do I need to have sponsorships, downloads? Like at the end of the day, like a lot of those are vanity metrics. I look at the downloads more as like, okay, that many people are getting impact from the guests.
Yep.
But the one thing it has helped is BD this year. Like we've had to turn away clients. Yeah. Because we don't have the bandwidth to be able to successfully help everybody, but because people are constantly seeing, we're a bit of an omnipresence out there because of the podcast, and that has helped with our company.
Right. Yeah, I think that's money, dude. It's money. So, what do you think? Like, if I were going to start a podcast right now, what should I know? What do you wish you would have known before you started?
Don't look at the downloads for a while.
Yeah.
Like make the goal 25 episodes.
Mm-hmm.
Don't look at how many people are downloading it. Look at the conversations that you're having. Look at the interviews that you're having. Engage yourself on some of the questions in the interaction. Like, can you be a better host on the next episode? What can you do to improve? So like those are the metrics that I would look at for anybody starting it. And then what kind of stuff, like, can you make clips out of it? Like, social media sharing, like how can you shine a spotlight on somebody else, because it's going to come back for you.
Right. Right. Yep.
And it's so easy. Like when you get started and like you look at that, I'm like, I got 3 downloads. Yes.
Yeah. Well,
and then like, and then you get to
early action, because it, it makes the journey that much better when you get to that magical mark, right?
Yeah. And then like, don't beat yourself up when you're at like literally episode 10 and you're still at 3 downloads. Like you remember the game plan that you actually are building it for. You're building this as an additional, potentially building this as an additional backdoor, an additional tool in your toolkit as a recruiter. Because one of the biggest problems going into 2024 is everybody wants authenticity.
Yeah.
In a world where so much of the noise is now AI generated,
yep.
How can you be authentic to be relevant?
Yep. Oh yeah, man. Well, it sounds like you're kind of doing this for me, man. I like that. Authentic to be relevant, dude. You're speaking my language right now. I like that stuff. That's good stuff. So with these guests, let's say we can't get a guest, right? And obviously you've talked about, like, for you, the main focus for your guests are hiring decision makers, ultimately leaders of companies that you'd want to work with. Do you ever just do training on your podcast?
I've never actually had a podcast episode where it's just me.
Yep. Okay. I've done that a couple times. It's cool. It's a different flavor. I'm just curious if you've ever done that.
I've never done it. And it's I think like what you might be thinking of is I think of the question that you were starting with is what happens if you don't have a guest and you're still trying to do your hit your goal of every other week.
Yep.
It's okay to like wait a week on the podcast.
Mm-hmm.
It's okay to like have that additional space, and it's okay to also like book 3 guests or 2 guests in 1 week, but then save on like sharing that podcast until it's in your schedule. Yep. Like, so if you want a good laugh, like my podcast right now, we're, coming into the month of November, I have enough interviews lined up that's going to take me all the way through next year.
Nice.
So like, feel free to and not everybody's going to say yes to being on a podcast in reality.
Right. Of course. Yeah.
So when you ask 10, it's just like recruiting. It's a numbers game. If you ask 10 people, it might be 2 or it might be 1. Go ask another 10.
Yep. No, I think that's excellent. With that part of it, and do you get the client on, like, you talked about some of the questions you're asking, right? And obviously you don't want the guest to come on and feel like, hey, this guy's trying to sell me at the end, right? So are you trying to do something, first question is what is kind of the structure that you're going for? I know that you kind of talked about pains, problems, and stuff like that. But are you ever really trying to highlight this person as being an expert, or highlight taking some of the stuff from the podcast to use for kind of employer branding that you can use for recruitment? Have you ever used it that way?
Those are the conversations I've had with those like hiring managers and those like, the assistants. And it's like, hey, like as a guest, here's are some of the things that you're going to do. We're going to talk about your story. We're going to talk about the company. We're going to talk about some of the challenges and the impacts that you're making. And that's what it is, what I call the meat of the podcast. That's where a good majority of the focus is. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that I've learned through time is, after doing a few episodes is, have like a little bit of a hook at the very beginning.
Yep.
Then you kind of go into like a little bit of their background and how they got to where they're at. Then you go into like their company and like what their company's doing. And then you go into the actual meat of the podcast. And that's like, going deep into like their story or deep into the organizational story.
Right.
And now like you are literally the dream for their comms department.
Mm-hmm.
Like all the stuff that their comms department wants,
right.
You're now, they've been asking for years, probably. You're now sitting there because you're a recruiter. Mm-hmm. You like to ask good questions. You're asking good questions and letting them tell stories.
Yeah.
And then after we get through the meat of the podcast, I like to have a little bit of like actionable insights, like kind of like, other industry leaders, like, questions that are important for that industry. But like in there, I always love asking some recruiting questions, right? Because it opens up the door into some of their challenges.
Mm-hmm. Now, do you have like a formal follow-up process after the fact, right? Like that is kind of, I'm going to put on my BD hat, that is like very BD focused, right? Like where you're like, okay, I've interviewed them. do you have like a touch point system after that, or you just kind of take what comes to you organically?
So prior to Web3 kind of going like tanking, I actually had like a touch point system afterwards and there was quite a few times that they're like, we get done and stopped recording. And then they were talking about their hiring challenges and like, all right, let's, one of the cool things that you could do. So like, I actually like to also give like a copy of the videos. Like I share the links so that way their communications department has access to everything. I actually give them links to different like things like Opus Pro, GitMunch, and all those other video tools. So that way they can start creating content.
Yep.
And now like you can shoot them a message like a week or two later, like, you guys have some openings. What recruiter, do you have recruiters working on those? Like, we'd love to be able to support you guys and now you're already in the door. And here's the fun thing: while you're sitting there sharing their links, it's if they have been open to working with recruiters or need the recruiting help, like you're literally first of mind now.
Yep. Perfect.
And create like a different messaging sequence for your guests too. Like you can semi-automate some of this stuff. Like, make sure you have like the sections on your drip sequences where you can fix it, add in like, guests talk about their story, this and that. But yeah, on top of that, like, because you've also highlighted other leaders, you can start hitting up the leaders that are in their circle too.
Yeah. For those of you that are with us right now, feel free to go in and ask some questions in the chat. Kira, will the podcast or this show will be on my channel here right after. You can go to my YouTube page as well. And then probably within about 48 hours, it'll actually be on my podcast, The Relevant Recruiter Show, which is on Apple, Spotify, wherever. So you can listen to it there after you wrap your call up. Anybody have any questions, feel free to go in there and ask. Ben, what did I miss? Where should we go? What have we not talked about that you think is important?
So one quick thing I will say, if you're looking for like a basic free guide, I have put together a LinkedIn article on how to like actually start a podcast, sharing some of those tools. So in case like you're not like, sitting there trying to like write it down, you're listening to this in the car, it's, go to my profile, look at my articles, it's right there. And it gives you a breakdown of some of my favorite tools.
Yeah. And to add on to that, Benjamin came up with an awesome list of podcasts in the recruiting space. For I think about what, 25, 30?
42 actually.
42, geez, yeah, 42. There's a lot. Thank you for the list.
And here's the thing, like somebody actually mentioned to me is like sharing everybody else's podcast, is it going to hurt your podcast? And I'm like, if it does, cool. But what if somebody gets something from another guest or another podcast that's really helping their business out? At the end of the day, we're all working on our desks. At the end of the day, we're all working on our own recruiting. At the end of the day, we have all our own stories, the things that we're dealing with, and not everybody's relatable to me.
Yeah.
Not everybody's relatable to some of my guests. So if somebody finds another avenue and they're seeing success from that, that's a beautiful thing about this industry is there's, coaches like Donnie, there's like podcasts all over the place.
Yeah.
Where, like, we really want the entire community to grow as a whole.
Yeah. Well, I think it's interesting you bring that up because I think that's, probably like mindset challenges. And I think that's how most people would think is like, oh, well, I don't know if I want to expose, it's like, I've had BSP on my podcast. I've had Terry and Drew Edwards on my podcast. I've had all these people that I guess could be competitors of mine, but yeah, it's about providing goodwill to the industry, right? I had DSP on my podcast. He had me on his. I don't think either one of us, our businesses are doing just fine, so yeah, I think there's so much to go around. And I think when you're coming from a place of goodwill and out of the market, I think that you said it earlier is like you're highlighting the guest, which then in turn kind of highlights, you, right? And I think there's a lot of different ways, there's the business development approach that you're kind of using, right? Being transparent is like, I know you have a good following. I know you've got a podcast on here. So it's like, cool, let me go tap into his network. Let me tap into his mind, right? It's all the same thing. So how do you leverage and then now my audience gets to hear your expertise, right? I can talk about podcasting, but like, it's not the same when it comes from somebody else, right? And giving different flavors and different stuff. So I think that's a really cool, thing that you brought up there is just like that there's enough to go around, I would try to get on everybody's podcast and I'd welcome anybody on mine,
And if you're looking at being a guest on a podcast, like Donnie said, I created a list. It's a LinkedIn article. You can just run down that list and be like, awesome.
Well, and just to kind of talk about that, just from a different angle, opportunity for you guys that are listening is to try to go be a guest on podcasts. Might be a good way for you to explore if you wanted to host a podcast. But, I would recommend to find podcasts where you're audience is going to be listening to. So maybe go find influencers in your space. I mean, being on a recruiter podcast is going to be fun, but you're talking to other recruiters, right? Or, for you being if somebody had a massive gov contract audience, I don't know if that exists, but if they did.
Oh, it's out there, and it's fun having conversations with them. And that was actually one of the things, like you're leading to where I was going to go next.
Let's do it.
Was if you don't want to put in the work for a podcast, go be a guest on an industry podcast. And this is all going to I'm going to give credit to Scott Love. Scott Love is, awesome. Love him. He's actually lives about 5 minutes down the road. So we get drinks constantly.
Yep.
But one of his secret weapons is speaking at industry events.
Yep.
And speaking it on industry podcasts, because now that entire industry that's focused just on you, and he also has an industry podcast too, where people are pointing to you as an authority in the space because it's somebody else's podcast that is now highlighting you as an authority in the space. And that is also so much easier than starting your own podcast to start.
Yep. No, 100%, man. I mean, that's a home run strategy and it's not even podcasting, right? If you can get speaking, like you mentioned, Scott Love, does that, right before this, I was just speaking to the group of Tennessee Recruiting Association, right? So like one thing, you get reaching massive audience, right? And I think that's when you're putting on like a marketing hat, even if you can go send an email on somebody else's list, it's low hanging fruit to be able to tap into somebody else's, kind of list and work and expose yourself to those audiences. So whether it's podcasts, emails, webinars, industry live events. Yeah.
I mean, and here's the thing, like there's also like so much amazing technology now. So if they post, not everybody's going to be able to like make social media clips because like some of those social media clips are expensive to like hire a production company to come in. And it's a lot of work for those. But if they post that interview on YouTube and you have the video of that, what you can do is drop that in, like just grab the YouTube link, drop that into Opus Pro, and Opus Pro or some of these other programs will create social media clips highlighting just who the speaker is, the transcription. So now you can pull stuff from that to use for self-promotion. To speak, I was on this podcast and this, I've actually done that a few times. Like they had a great podcasting team,
right.
But because I know some of these tools, I was on a podcast, use some of these tools because I was able to grab the YouTube link, created social media clips, and I went use that to highlight myself while highlighting that podcast.
Oh, that's money.
And they were just like, wait, what'd you do?
And it actually creates the video clip for you too.
Oh yeah. It creates the video clip. It cuts it. It adds the transcriptions.
Shoot, man.
There are
just took me a picture today.
Opus Pro and Get Much are like two of my current favorites. And Video AI is another good one.
Sweet. That's good stuff, man. I learned something today. That's awesome. Well, I've learned several things, but that's good. I want to see if you have any tactical advice on, because I know you mentioned right away when you start, it's like, don't look at your downloads, but outside of sharing on social media, like what other tactical advice do you have about just growing downloads, growing audience?
So one of the good things is like getting your show optimized for SEO.
Okay.
So when you hop on and look at a lot of like if you start like Googling, like perfect example, Googling recruiting podcasts, a lot of the recruiting podcasts that I put together on that list, I had no clue where they were at first.
Right.
Because if you start typing in recruiting and podcast, they wouldn't pop up because a lot of them didn't actually say anything about recruiting in their show notes or in the notes for the podcast. So I would set that up to be optimized because people somehow find you and through search. That's one of the biggest things.
Yep.
The second one is like share some good stories and make sure you're like highlighting and tagging. Like, don't just one of my biggest mistakes when I first started sharing the podcast was live and had the link to the podcast. Nobody like Donnie, you're the relevant recruiter. How unrelevant is just sharing a link on YouTube, on LinkedIn? It
goes nowhere. Yeah.
Like the impressions are zero. Yeah. If you share a story from the podcast and like a little bit of a success or intertwine a story into the share, how are the impressions on LinkedIn, Donnie?
Right now?
Yeah. If you share a story and then share the
link.
They
go way up. I mean, telling stories is where it's at, whether you're podcasting or not. Yeah.
So like pull some of the stories from the podcast and use that as your social shares. And that will really help with like starting to kick it up. And then like, once again, it goes into like the consistency. Like it's weird having people like hit me up like, hey, you didn't drop the podcast at 6 a.m. I went for my run. I was expecting it. Sorry.
Yeah.
So like creating a consistency, and one of the things that I'm doing next is creating a bit of a community around the podcast. And that's what I've also seen with like some of the industry podcasts is creating like an additional community, building out an email list. It's really just those like small things that you can like help set yourself up as an authority in the niche in the industry that you are working in, because that's going to like real quick, like you have two types of like I would say like BD recruiting. You have your active hunting where you're hitting in-mails, you're making their cold calls, you're like people are on drip campaigns. So that's active hunting. This is farming. Like you are planting some seeds that might pop up tomorrow, or it could pop up a year from now.
Yep.
I mean, even though I sunset that Web3 podcast, like when I think it was like after I lost all my crypto in Voyager, everything got locked away with the FTX downfall. I was kind of just like mostly pissed at the industry. But guess what? How long ago was that fall? Maybe a year ago. I'm still, because of that stuff is out there, having people reach out to me about Web3 space, because like some of these podcast things and videos and content that you've created is almost evergreen. I have a LinkedIn article that I wrote that's like, I think 3.5 years old that still brings in leads.
Wow. Yep. If you get the right stuff and it's got good value, man, that's one of the cool things about content is it works for you 24/7, 365. It never dies.
Yeah. And it's something I didn't realize at first.
Yeah. Well,
and
your podcasts, right? People are listening to them on the run. You're not there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I know something that it's something that I know Donnie's been teaching for a long time is like finding ways to create an authority and finding ways to stay relevant in the space. And it's one of the things that I started looking at. Like, I mean, this is something that I learned through the podcast was how many recruiters are out there in the GovCon space? How many recruiters are out there, like just out there in the industry?
Right.
And really like when it comes down to like how many authoritative figures are out there. And when I started looking at a lot of the authoritative figures out there, they're not better recruiters than you. Like, okay, maybe Rich Rosen closed like 100 more deals than you have this month, but that's Rich Rosen. But at the end of the day, it's people are looking for the content, and the content creates you as an authority in the space. Yep. And because of you're an authority in the space, like people are always looking for help. People are looking to answer challenges, and some of those LinkedIn articles. And real quick, like when I say LinkedIn articles, I suck at writing. Like I literally failed in English in college. I almost failed English everywhere. Like I suck at writing. My wife is just like constantly, she can't even read some of these articles I put out because my writing is so horrible. Like she's also an English major too. So she's like looking at the grammar, but here's the thing, like, yeah, but here's the thing, like, like when you're reading content on, I see somebody said AI, like AI can help a lot, like writing some stuff. But when you're reading content on LinkedIn or content, are you looking for every minute grammar? No, you're reading it for the structure. You're reading it for the body. You're reading it for like, you can feel passion in reading stuff. Yeah. So that's how I write. I write like a fifth grader.
Yep. That's funny. I laugh because it's like writing has been like the last skill that I've developed. So I've always go on video because it's easier for me to be on video than it is for me to write. And then, the next thing after video is obviously audio. That's just transcription or things. But like, if you're in my world, you'll notice that, like in my coaching program, all my support is via video or it's via voice. I very rarely type things back to people. And the content side has been like a skill, the writing part for me. So yeah, man, I can definitely resonate with that one there.
And like, or at least for LinkedIn articles, like take your time writing them. Like some of my articles like might take like 2 weeks, and like LinkedIn, like you can actually set it all up and it auto saves. So like I have like 3 articles I'm working on right now that I've been working on for like 2 weeks now, and it might be a week or two before they're done. I'm in no rush. Right. Like I get a thought, I add to it, but many times in like BD emails, I can literally point out this, like I'll share those articles, like, because a lot of times, like if you're sharing an article, like share it on your website in your own website blog, but also share it as a LinkedIn article because people don't want to go to your website and read your white paper.
Right.
But they're happy to stay on LinkedIn. Like, oh, okay, he's putting that out there in more of an open space.
Yep. Well, not only that, is tactically LinkedIn doesn't make any money when they pull traffic away. So sharing and things like that to pull people off the website's an easy killer to, your.
Oh yeah. If you share a link like actually on something, like you just see the impressions, like my impressions drop by sometimes the thousands.
Yep.
If I share the LinkedIn in like the comment section, like it's up by the thousands.
Yep. No, yeah, just that one little tactical thing makes a huge impact. Going back to what you said earlier, I think there's a huge opportunity for, you were talking about like recruiters and differentiation and standing out and being the authority and how many people are in the space. And, one of the things that's cool about, where I sit in the industry is just kind of hearing all of these stories. And I can tell you that like the number one frustration is that seasoned recruiter that knows he's damn good, but can't find a way to put himself out there. And because it's like, you're one of the things, like my wife just became a real estate agent a year and a half ago. The amount of work and coursework and testing and stuff she had to do to become a real estate agent was insane, right? If I wanted to recruit, I can just change my LinkedIn profile tomorrow, and guess what? I'm a recruiter. There's no barrier to entry in this industry, and we have to compete against, entry-level people. I'm not saying everybody has to start somewhere, so I'm not knocking that, but like there's got nothing more frustrating than being top of your game and watch all these other people around you kind of sprint faster because they understand technology. They understand how to put themselves out there.
Oh my God. Like Donnie, that was me. Like for years, like I hated putting myself out there. I didn't want to sit there and post content. Like I despised the LinkedIn, like bros, like, oh, and then like 3 million followers now because like, bro, dude, yeah, like crazy, like this. But I'm like, I only want to be known for the work that I did. Mm-hmm. I wanted to be known for like the amount of positions I filled. And yes, your referral network is powerful, and we love referrals because of that. But at the end of the day, you can't sometimes structure your entire business just on referrals, because that just goes with the ups and downs of like what people need in that moment. So, putting yourself out there a little bit definitely helps. And like, Donnie, you're going to laugh at this. Like you see me out there. I hate putting myself out there.
Well, I mean, I don't particularly love it either.
But like I'm going to have Donnie on the podcast next. And here's a cool thing. I'm hosting Donnie. Donnie's telling great stories. Donnie's talking about things that recruiters can do to stay relevant. And once again, my conversation of this is I'm putting a spotlight on Donnie. I'm making Donnie be in the spotlight, and I can be a little more behind the scenes. Yep. And because of that, the spotlight's back on me.
Yep. No, it's brilliant, man. That's a great way to share that and great perspective around that. What are the last thoughts on podcasts? Is there anything else, if somebody was hesitant about starting a podcast, like what would be your advice or encouragement to them?
Like I think, like we said earlier, even if you're thinking about it, go try to be on a few industry podcasts. Go find, put your recruiting hat on, find a list of all the recruiting industry podcast or the industry podcasts in your space, and go reach out to every single one of them. Because here's the thing: many times podcasts are looking for guests. So because many times like podcast hosts are having to keep their show going. So they're like, oh, cool. It would be perfect. But kind of put together a little bit of a pitch. Like you can use ChatGPT to kind of start your pitch, but make it your own personal story. Hey, here's the things that I would love to share that can have an impact on your audience. So if you're looking at or even thinking about starting a podcast, go be a guest first.
Love it. Love it. And your advice about using an AI or ChatGPT to create yourself a nice little intro to go out and reach up the market. That's a great.
Yeah. Oh my God, ChatGPT, it's a great starter, and then just personalize it.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Ladies and gentlemen, that is Benjamin Mena joining us today. Go ahead and tap that like button. I know you guys love this. I know there's a ton of value. Share any thoughts that you have in the comments there. Benjamin, before we go, where can everybody find you? Where's the best place to find the podcast, you as an individual?
So LinkedIn, Benjamin Mena, Instagram, Ben L. Mena. I think Instagram is the place where I seem to be the most active, even though I committed to being active on LinkedIn this year. That was one of my commitments. And the podcast, you can find it on Spotify. You can find it on Apple Podcasts or Amazon. It is under the Elite Recruiter Podcast. And in a few weeks, you'll see Donnie live on there.
Oh, we're recording that right now. So thank you, man. Thank you for hanging on the Relevant Recruiter Show. I'm looking forward to being on your show here in about 10 minutes. We'll get started. But you guys can download this later if you guys, just watching it soon. Like I said, it'll probably be out next week. It's on my YouTube channel. Pick it up there. But make sure you go download the Elite Recruiter Podcast. Check out Benjamin's show and support him on his journeys. He's doing a ton for our industry here. So, ladies and gentlemen, I'll be back next week. I've got another great guest coming up. So come meet me next Wednesday live right here on LinkedIn. Until then, we'll see you all next time on the Relevant.
Oh, and one last thing. For those that are still listening, I want you to drop in the comment section on YouTube or on LinkedIn of the impact and what you've learned from Donnie that's taken your business to the next level.
Appreciate that, Benjamin. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll see you next week.